Very distinguished speaker tonight on a very sad topic. I want to actually ask someone to introduce Kevin. She has put most of this together. She's the sponsor of the feast and has just done an incredible amount of work. So I just want to ask Regina Cataldo if she wouldn't mind introducing Kevin or Annett.
Okay, so it was fairly long, so I'm just going to cut it down. So good evening, everyone. I'm Regina Cataldo, a fourth-year student in the Faculty of Social Work, and I want to welcome and thank you all for attending this event tonight. This event is not intended to hurt nor harm anyone. Its intent is to create awareness, healing, and bridging the gap. I know that thank you should be saved for the end, but here I go anyway. I want to thank the University of Regina for allowing the cultural customs of the pipe and feast to occur for this event. Thank you to the Faculty of Social Work for getting Kevin Annett to Regina. I also want to thank Dr. Garson Hunter, who has invested much of his time and money into this event. Most importantly, I want to thank the elders, Isidore Pelche, Diane Cashwatam, Gordon Key, Waiton, and the elders helpers for supporting this event and contributing their time and knowledge with all of us to share. And finally, I'd like to thank Elmer Iashapi, Roland K., Delia Pelche from Chile for Children for preparing the feast, Ken Ward from All Nations Hope, and Larry Oakes. Eagle Strong Voice, Kevin Annett, is an advocate for the truth of what happened to the First Nations people and their amazing culture. He spreads awareness and creates alliances, and he reminds me of great leaders of the past, such as Pontiac and Tecumseh. He has the ability and strength to share the truth of the genocide that occurred here in Canada. As a result, he lost everything, including his family, but gained so much more in other ways. He dedicates his life to advocating and spreading the truth. Hopefully, by him presenting this evening, those of us working with Aboriginal people will leave tonight with a better understanding of what Aboriginal people have been through, and in turn will assist us in our profession. If this event can help any of you in any way, it will have been a success. The more we learn, the better equipped we are. On behalf of the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Regina, please join me in welcoming our very special guest, Eagle Strong Voice, Kevin Annett.
Thank you. Thank you, Serena. Thank you, everyone, and the elders, and especially the feast earlier. Thank you all for remaining who you are. And in the language of my people from Ireland, there's a saying, and I learned it last year when I was in Dublin. Actually, just last April, I was gathering with some survivors of Catholic orphanages in Dublin who, when you sit and listen to their stories, it's like listening to survivors from the residential schools. And one of my aunts, great aunts over there, said there's a saying that they always use there when they're looking for strength, and that's in Gaelic, Ta Gaed and Phobel Art, which means the face of the people is upon you, which I translated as meaning that the ones before and the ones who come after us are always looking to us in this moment. And the things we struggle with are always for reasons that we can't necessarily know at that moment. And I know in my own life that's been very true. And I've always looked to the ones, not only the survivors, but the ones who've come before me to keep me guided on the right path. And so I want to hold them up as well. And I also want to put what we do tonight in kind of a broader context, historically and internationally, because after here, I'm going over to London, Switzerland, Italy, Ireland, to link up with survivors of the same kinds of torture and crime that happened under the same institutions of church and state. And what the people there are struggling with is very similar to what you're going through here in terms of the attempts at cover-up and denial, the attempt to exonerate the perpetrators and ignore the needs of the survivors, and dictate justice and healing on the terms not of the survivors, but of the people who were ultimately responsible. And so I hope that this can be a source of strength to know that your story is not isolated, that you're not alone. I know that when I began to work in the healing circles 15 years ago in the downtown east side of Vancouver, the main thing that everyone was struggling with was the capacity to recover enough self-respect to be able to speak and own your pain and name the names. And it's that kind of strength and courage that's allowed all of these amazing changes that we see around us today happening among all our nations. I think for me, more and more I'm realizing this is a historic opportunity in the time of all of our nations here on Turtle Island, because it's a chance for us to reinvent ourselves. In Six Nations last year when I was speaking in Brantford, I first learned about the tradition of the two-road wampum and what the Eastern nations said to my people when they first came to this land. And that is, they offered the two-road wampum to them in peace, saying we're to walk our own paths and not dominate one over the other, but just walk alongside each other in equality and peace. And that offer was made by the Indigenous nations to my people. And at first my people did accept that. We know that there is a whole history in terms of the white-native interaction on this continent where there was genuine equality that did occur for a while. And we know the tradition in the Métis, where I'm from in Winnipeg, my Métis relatives began to teach me this about how before the arrival of the missionaries there was white-native cooperation. There was that tradition, and yet the empire came in after that and changed all that. And so as a person from that tradition, I feel a responsibility to disown that, to say I'm not part of that tradition anymore. What can I do? I think it's similar, I don't know if you saw that film about the plot to kill Hitler, Valkyrie, where some of the German officers at the end of the war said we couldn't live with the dishonor anymore of being part of this regime. We had to do something to show that we don't want to be part of it anymore. And so for me as a white person, this is part of my job now, to say we have to fully disclose what my tradition did here. We have to take responsibility and, if need be, apply jail terms to those responsible, just like it happened in Nuremberg. Because I remember Peter Yellowquill, a friend of mine in Winnipeg, when we were outside the Truth and Reconciliation gathering there on June 15th, he was asked by a reporter what he thought about healing and reconciliation. And he said, well, it's kind of like healing and reconciliation in Canada is like if a man steals your car and then he drives up to your front door and knocks on the door and apologizes for stealing your car and then gets in the car and drives away again. It's like that in Canada because the words are said but nothing changes. We know that on the ground. We know that's true. And the difficulty my people have is that we're so afraid. We're afraid of what we might lose. You know, the first time I got fired, 1995, when the United Church showed me the door, I realized I saw the fear in the eyes of those church officials and the lawyers. And the big problem here is that the lawyers have been in charge of this whole process. And that's something that we have to take away back from them. We have to take back the process of healing and reconciliation so we can define it on our terms and not what a lawyer says your pain is worth. I mean, I haven't, in my latest edition of Hidden from History, which I have here, and I hope to donate these to the library and other places here, but there's a chart in there, and the lawyers call it a meat chart, believe it or not. And they assign points, and of course, I don't have to explain this to some of you because you know it. They assign points according to the pain and torture that people suffered. And they arbitrarily say it's worth this much money. And then after that, to accept the money, you have to indemnify the churches, which means you'll never sue them, and you won't even hold them accountable or responsible for what happened. That's not only cowardice, but it's criminal. Because under the law, nobody has the right to demand that of a person. And yet the courts and the government of Canada and the churches have colluded in that crime. Because a cover-up is as serious as the crime itself. And when I hear talk of healing and reconciliation, I'm appalled. I'm ashamed to be part of this country when I see what's gone on. Because it hasn't come from a human point of view. It hasn't come from a simple recognition that tens of thousands of children died and were killed. And so until we take responsibility for that, how can there be healing? Like Ward Churchill once said, the healing only begins when the hurting stops. And the hurting hasn't stopped. It was in that spirit that we made this film Unrepentant, and I'm sorry that tonight we can only show part of it. But I do have copies, and nothing I do is copyrighted, so please copy everything, the film, the book, and everything. It's public knowledge. It comes from the lives of people, so no one should own it. But in the film, what we tried to do is put a human face on what happened in the residential schools. And it's really interesting when we made this 4 years ago now. All we wanted to do was tell the story of how I began to stumble over this stuff in my church in Port Alberni and the survivors and how they came forward. And it's amazing the response it's had, and I think it's directly responsible for the Stephen Harper's apology, because what people might not realize is that a Native member of Parliament called Gary Morasti from Saskatchewan here saw our film, and he heard about the rallies we were holding in Vancouver, and the demand we were making to the churches that they repatriate the remains of these children who died, that the kids be given a proper burial, the ones who died in the school. And he heard about that, and in April 2007, he got up in Parliament and he asked a question to Jim Prentice, who was Minister of Indian Affairs. He said, when are the children going to be brought home? And after that, within the week, Jim Prentice announced a Missing Children's Task Force. They announced the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was finally in gear, and it prompted that single question from the Member of Parliament from here, caused that. So education and knowledge is power. It's something that we can never underestimate. The ability for people to tell the stories. And that's why so much of what I do now is I go around and try to encourage people to sit with a video camera and record the evidence before it's lost from the elders and the other people. So essential. And so I want to hold that up to show that, I'm just this guy who was a minister in Port Alberni, and if you persist for 15 years at something, then it has an effect. We're always told we have no power, but we do. We have an amazing power when you stand on the truth. And so I hope that this film is a testimony to that. And what I would like to invite us to do is, I wanted to show 15 minutes of this, just the first part. You can see some of the faces of the survivors. And then after that, as part of me sharing more of this stuff, I'd like to open it up, and because I very much believe that the wisdom is held in the group, and I'd like your comments and questions and your own thoughts about how in your own community here we can proceed to that place, I think, where we need to get back to as different nations, and that is, we used to share this land together, and we can do that again. And I think this is an opportunity to do that. And out of the terrible pain and torture that was suffered, we can find a new beginning. And I think it's an opportunity for us to do that. So thank you for coming here, for the courage to come here, and for the love to come here. And I'll show this now before I start crying. And then we can talk after. Thank you. Does anyone want to say anything or ask anything at this point? Could you turn the lights on there so I can see? Okay.
We wanted to see the rest. Where is this available?
Oh, I have copies here. I'll leave them with you. You can also view it on hiddenfromhistory.org, which is our website. And I'll write that on the board after. But it's also up on YouTube. There's been about 500,000 hits on YouTube, so Google video too. Yep.
My name is Janet Dufour. I went to residential school for 10 years, and I just want to say that each time I see something or hear something, the pain comes back. And I just want to say that because...
I didn't turn it on.
Oh,
Sorry.
like I said, each time I see and hear something about residential school, the pain is still there. And although I thought, like I talk about it a lot, and I guess the reason why I'm saying this is because many of us, through all the pain that we suffered, we didn't know how to handle our pain, so we resorted to drinking and drugging, and in the process, many of us got sick with cirrhosis and all that, and I am one of them. And there's times that I feel cheated, because I didn't understand why I was in pain. I didn't understand till I came here to university, and then I took Indian studies, and I started learning about why we went to residential school and how we went to residential school and all that. And it's very, it's a very good thing that white people are beginning to be interested in trying to understand why we are the way we are, and to try and understand us more, instead of, like, I've heard a lot of white people say, oh, Indians are crying for nothing. No, we're not, maybe some of us are crying for nothing, because yes, there is help out there, but at the same time, before we are aware of what we are going through, we have to understand where the pain comes from, you know, and then the white people have to understand us as well. You know, and this is the sorriest part. Many of us older people are suffering from, you know, something that's going to take our lives sooner than expected, you know, and that's the saddest part because we, you know, like I have great-grandchildren. God, that's good.
That's all right.
Thank you.
That's all right. I'm not sure if this will help, but there's something I always show people, and that's a document that I found 10 years ago in the UBC library. And I mean, one of the issues, like often in the healing circles, is like the way people blame their parents, the way it's passed on, because like, why didn't they come and do something? Well, there was a law in Canada, and in the late 1920s, the government handed over guardianship rights to the principal of the residential school. So before Native people were wards of the state, they brought in this form, and it required that every Native parent sign away guardianship rights to the principal under the control of the government and the church. So this document made it so that your parents lost custody over you, lost legal guardianship. And, you know, I remember using this once in a healing circle in Nanaimo, and there was a woman in her 80s, and when we showed this to her, she burst, like she said, my whole life I've carried that resentment. And we burned the document in the Longhouse fire, and it was beautiful. It was just, she was able to let go of that. So this is the kind of knowledge or document that we need to circulate. So I just thought I should show that to you. Yeah.
Thank you. My name's Glenn Warren. I'm from the Cooperative First Nation north of Regina here. And I've lived there pretty well all my life. I sobered up here in Regina. I sobered up 1972. And ever since that time, I went home and tried to help my people with the problem of alcoholism. And I've worked in that field ever since I sobered up pretty well. But I'm still working in that field. I'm 73 years old, but I don't give up because I raised a family of 8. I lost one son in a car accident after a night of drinking. That happened 11 years ago, or 12 years ago now. And I lost 6 brothers, all to alcohol, and we're all went to boarding school. I'm the second youngest. My youngest brother died about a year ago, Irvin, and he drank till he was 60 years old. I always think of myself fortunate because I quit when I was 35 years old. And that's quite young for our native people to start quitting. I find it very difficult to get the people to understand alcoholism and where it came from. And I always say the roots are the boarding school, because that's what caused me to start drinking, was the hurt, like the lady was mentioning, the hurt that I see with people and what they had to go through. My dad also was a residential school survivor, and he went to school in Elkhorn in Manitoba. And he said he worked here till he was 18. And that's all he done was work. He never hardly went to school. He said he quit when he had grade 4. Mm-hmm. And supposedly, these boarding schools were built to give us an education. I myself got grade 8. I finished going to school after I sobered up. But these are things that are very difficult for Indian people to live down, and how in the hell do we get the government to believe us? Like, I've worked with the government for funding for years, and I coordinated a 5-band project in my area for 12 years. But now I've been just working in my own community. And it is difficult, and you still see the hurt all the time. Like, I experienced a lot of the hurt myself, my family, my wife here, my daughters. I had 5 daughters and 3 sons. I say I lost one of the boys. But these are things like like when I talk, I just jump all over the darn place. I don't know where to really start. What makes real sense? Because we've been laughed at so much, you know, saying that we're not telling the truth, we're just telling lies. I know I went to try to get like money from the funding that they have for residential school. And the only one that I got was the 10-3 funding, which everybody got that applied for it. But other than that, like I got my arm broken in school. It's still that way. It's given me trouble pretty well all my life. But these are, you know, some of the stories that I hear. You know, it is really sad for us people to live it down anyway. I started school when I was 4 months old. My mother died in Fort Capel at the hospital. I was transferred from there to the boarding school, Muscovy. And I lived there for 3 years, from when I was 4 months old.
4 months old?
Yeah, 4 months old. I got paid for that 10-3. And I got 2 years paid for it.
Wow.
So when I'm telling this story, I'm not telling lies or anything, it's the truth I'm telling. But I wish other people, like there's a lot, like you said, denial, even in our own communities, that I try to get people to talk about, but it's the only way to get it out, is to be able to talk about it. And I and my family have went to a lot of self-help programs. I think that's where it really helped us. Like we went to Inner Child and different other programs, self-help programs. I go to AEA to meet. I've been 38 years sober now this fall, and I still go there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, brother.
My mom was in a Scotland residential school. I haven't been to a residential school, but you know that there's one thing that I was blessed with, and that's understanding. You know what my mom went through, and why I became the person I am today. You know, as a result of the residential school, what my mom went through. You know, I grew up, nobody ever told me they loved me. Nobody ever showed me how to be part of a family. And so when I started having children, I had to learn everything myself. I had to read it from a magazine, you know, or from a program on TV, that I should tell my kids that I love them. And to give them a hug, at least, you know, 10 hugs a day. I have 7 children, so when I first heard this, it's like, holy cow, how am I going to give my kids 60 hugs in one day? You know, so, and it's just something that I remembered. And so I had to learn all this stuff, you know, from books, magazines. No parent ever showed me any of that stuff. And that was one thing that they stripped away from us, was the family unit, you know, being part of a family where there's a mom, there's a dad. And like my mom was taken from her parents when she was 5 years old. I don't know how many people here have children that are 5 years old, but can you imagine that child being stripped from you at 5 years old and then put into a strange, cold place where people are abusing you? It's incomprehensible. And so I had to look at all of those things, because I didn't understand what was happening to me, why I was the way I was. And I'm really glad that the university offered Indian studies. You know, and you know, knowledge is so important. You know, understanding is so important. And I got angry the first time I took Indian studies. I got upset, and then there was people in there, white people in there that said, no, that didn't happen to you guys. They wouldn't believe it. They says, no, I don't believe it, and I won't believe it. That's what happened to the Native people. But, you know, I really believe that, you know, knowledge is very important, that people, they need to be educated. They need to know what happened to the Native people, to the Indian people. And, you know, and I think that's so important. And even right now, I was sitting here, like every school should have a class in Indian studies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, starting from elementary, going up into high school, and every, you know, it should be mandatory. You know, because people need to know what happened. And that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. We've been actually trying to get this material into the BC high school curriculum for about 8 years. And at the local level, teachers are really receptive. School board and government, forget it. There's just massive resistance to getting any, just bare facts, like the death rate in the schools, around 50%. You know, I mean, I read somewhere that the death rate in Auschwitz was about 20% every year. So the death rate in Indian residential schools was greater than that, double that. And it's, you know, incomprehensible to imagine, but it's been admitted. The Globe and Mail admitted that 3 years ago. They talked about Peter Bryce's documents, you know, a doctor who went out west here and found that. He said in a report, children are being taken, the healthy children are being taken and put in the dormitories with the sick kids with TB deliberately. I mean, that's mass murder. And yet the government's position and the churches is still, well, we didn't do that intentionally. Well, how do 50% of the kids keep dying off over 50 years if it wasn't intentional? So, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's getting around, it's not having to prove something, because you're the living witnesses. It's having to deal with the mindset, you know, that this is a wonderful, liberal, humanitarian country. And, you know, I mean, I grew up in the United Church. I never knew about this until I started listening, you know. And I was a minister. I didn't know anything about this. Although that's not to say whites didn't know about it. I think a lot of white people in the small towns where these schools were operating, they knew very well what was happening, you know. So it's a long process, but it started at least. Where we take it, I guess, depends on us.
Do you have recommendations?
Well, I mean, we need Aboriginal Holocaust museums. We need it in the curriculum. We need memorial sites with the names of the dead. We need complete disclosure. We need the children brought home for proper burial. But you know, you say any of this to anyone within the church or government or the police, and it's like, boom, forget it. You know, you're on the blacklist, to put it mildly, if you start talking about this stuff. But on the other hand, this strikes a chord whenever I'm outside the country and I talk about this. I mean, I was in Europe, in Rome. We did a vigil outside the Vatican for the children who died in the residential schools, and it was quite awesome. All the media were there. I mean, I've never experienced this. Every television, newspaper, and radio in Rome was there to cover this thing. And people were coming up saying, we didn't know there were Indians still alive in Canada. We thought they were all dead, right? I mean, and how could Canada be doing this? We knew America did this, but Canada did this? I mean, that's a common attitude, right? So, yeah. Yep.
I am David Mamani. I'm from Bolivia. And as you know, in Bolivia we didn't have this kind of residential schools, but we were segregated. We didn't have right to study in any school before 1952. after that, little by little, the education came. But also, I studied in Western model kind of education, but we often punished in school. We often receive very, very strong punishments, physical punishments, also psychological punishments. When somebody was talking about hugging, maybe that's my problem because I have that problem. I don't like to hug to my children, to my wife. She is here right now. And I am analyzing my background history. Why is I am like that? And also I am aware that the education we embrace was our education that came from Western.
Mm-hmm.
Our education is more balanced, more focused in life. But this education more focused in competition, more economic, looking for economic things. I used to be in Bolivia as a pastor in evangelical church. So far, I understand the churches, Catholic Church, evangelical church, they are focused in let's say in imperialist way. How, my question is, how they can teach them? 80 or 90% of churches today, they don't want to hear us, listen us. They don't want to change. They think they are in right place. God put them in right place, but they are doing wrong. They are following bad side. So as a First Nation in South America, North America, or anywhere in the world, how can we challenge them to change? Because this is, I think, a big project in the world guided by some group of people who has power. I know many white people in South America, even here. Maybe they don't understand a lot of them, but they don't want to have this kind of life. But because of media, because of church, because of education, the power is manipulating us. So my question is, how can we, I don't know how to say, to face this problem to the media, the church, because those are complicit of this problem.
If anyone wants to respond to that or have their thoughts. I had one idea about that. I was asked to come and speak in a Catholic church once in Vancouver, and when I was talking to the people there, they asked exactly that question, like, how do we help this? And it came down to the original idea. If you read at the end of Matthew in the Bible, it says Jesus, it's called the Great Commissioning, where he sends out his disciples into the world and he says, make disciples of all nations. I said, reading the original Aramaic in Jesus' language, he did not say go and convert people. He said go and teach. Teach just means you're sharing. But as that word got translated over the centuries, it became a different word. And in the Latin, the meaning was not teach. subdue. Because in that mindset, when the church got together with the Roman Empire, they said you can only teach by conquering. There was this sense that you could only go into an area and either make everybody like you or kill them all off. And I don't know what that has to do with Jesus' teachings when he says love your enemy and practice nonviolence. That got destroyed. The Christianity destroyed their own fundamental teachings. And until they recover that basic teaching of respect and equality with other faiths, not conquest over, then there is no Christianity, in my opinion. That there is no so I mean, that's a real challenge for people in the churches, because it means undoing a whole tradition, of the imperial church and how it got in bed with the state and empire. And that's something everybody needs to do in our culture, but that's just the one thing to do. Yep.
Can
Yep.
you explain that in your video?
Well, we touch on it. I explain more in my book. There's that whole kind of unknown history about what happened to Christianity when it got, I mean, just I won't bore you with too much of a history lesson, but it basically, in order to become the state religion in the 4th century, the church became a corporation. And that's why I say, the corporate body called the Vatican, or the United Church of Canada, was set up by an act of Parliament in 1925. And it was given the powers of a bank. It was given the powers of the church officers are trustees of the government. So there's the church, the local congregation, and then there's the corporate body, right? And it's that corporate institution that planned all of these things. And so we've got to distinguish there between people's faith and this whole tradition. If I go into more of that, I won't. Yeah.
Dan Lindsay. Basically I'm new here. I've been living on the West Coast, and I've been following you since, I forget the gentleman's name, and Frank. I don't know how is it with this disclosure with the first lawsuits.
Archie Frank.
And I remember trying to download your book when your website was continually being sabotaged, and at the moment still is.
Yes.
I work with the youth. I was working in the East Side a lot, and I was actually at some of your rallies in Vancouver. And here in Regina, I work with youth, mostly 18 to 25, and these are in most cases, the grandchildren and the children of survivors in some cases. And not to minimize the survivors. I'm Pine Ridge School 74 myself in Ontario, but the children and the grandchildren, the difficulties that they're facing now, and like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it was like we're decades behind, because the immediate problems and the immediate damage right now is with our children. With the handing down of the lack of parenting skills, and coming in again with the drugs and the alcohol, the gangs, the violence. And for me, I'm just overwhelmed with our present generation. And I just wonder if we're ever going to ever get caught up, because we have to deal with the problems we're dealing with today as well. And it's just compounding. And I've watched you, in like 15, 16 years you've been on your journey. And we're just flooded right now, especially in Regina, just with our youth. The problems faced by our youth. And it's just being repeated. The cycle of with the problems that are affecting our youth is just being handed down. And it's just a cycle that's almost impossible to break. And yet we're only dealing today with the survivors. And in a lot of cases, that's from my age and up, let alone the majority of the population of us Aboriginal people are below the age of 40 now. So it's just a huge problem.
When it works, what helps it happen? When there is breakthrough, what has made that happen?
When we do get, it's almost got to be in the right time at the right place, and the person has to be receptive to doing things. But it's just huge, what we're dealing with, and it's like we're so far behind, and people don't realize how far behind we are. until you actually get on the front lines and start working.
Mm-hmm.
Because trying to deal with our history in the residential schools is almost gets passed over dealing with the immediate needs of our young people today, which are these are the ones that are suffering the effects of the residential schools from, you know, the family. And so it's a multi-generational trauma that's just, some times it's like an avalanche going out of control. So I think we have to also try to get, you know, the government, and well, we do try, some of us, to talk to them, but they're, I should say about the Nile, it's a river in Africa somewhere, you know, to get them on that, you know, our babies are affected by this too. You know, we were talking about our 5-year-olds. They're affected by this too.
Well, you know, the big trouble I often find in Vancouver working there on East Hastings is, you know, the white foster care system, how in Vancouver Island alone, there was a 10 times increase in the 1990s of kids taken and put in white foster homes. And I was working with a woman last month, and there was an anonymous complaint about her. They took all 4 of her kids. One of them was still breastfeeding. She hasn't seen them since. And they just came into the home. They didn't even do a review or anything. She was native, so they just took them. And I mean, I don't know why people are making like a total stink about that. I mean, this is like out and out onslaught against Native families, and it's all legal, and the social workers and the cops all cooperate. And so, I mean, it's got to be, there's got to be some way of just, I mean, we've relied on documentaries, on protests and that kind of thing, but, you know, there was a guy in 60 Minutes in New York who came out and he was going to document all this, including about the missing women on the coast that we've been working a lot on. And his producer told him, well, it's about Indians. Our ratings always go down whenever we have anything about Native people on. So they didn't broadcast it. I mean, that's what you're dealing with if you're talking about the whole mainstream. So it's not easy, but I mean, you just got to keep pushing all the time. And that's the only thing, the only way to get results, you know.
Hi.
Hello.
I know what he's talking about, and I just wanted to share a poem that I wrote when I was in grade 12. It went, you look at a child, a native child, and you see the pain in her eyes. So lost, so broken and full of fear, she can't eat, she can't sleep, she can't play. Nightmares are now true, but why, God, where are you? Questions fill her head unending like the rain fills the sea. Will I get to eat today? Will my daddy touch me that way? When will my mom come home? I feel so all alone. Neglected and abused, without food, this child tries to live. Her parents are just as lost, so young, searching for what is true. But all they could find was drugs and alcohol and a person who says, I love you, but didn't mean it. They as well were like that child that had those questions and thoughts, but because of lost hope, they couldn't say no to the things that bind them up. I know how it is to live like this because I was once there. Creator, help them see what you've done for me. Please just show them your love.
Thank you. Down here and then up there. Yep. And then, yep.
Thank you, that was beautiful. I actually read that poem somewhere and I finally got to meet the person who read it. I wrote it instead. But yeah, my name is Ashley Boulanje and I'm from the Ochapowace First Nation. I'm 25 years old, so I'm a cry too. I have been affected by residential schools. I grew up in foster care. I grew up in about 17 foster homes. And, you know, I used to wonder where my mom was and why she didn't fight for us back then. But, you know, I come to that understanding, like this woman was saying, it's all about understanding. And I watch it all around me, how the residential schools affects all of us. And I have 3 very beautiful children, you know, and I lost them. you know, and because I was not taught those skills for parenting. You know, I was sexually abused, and I know where that came from too now, and I think, you know, that we have to really look at our youth now, and the survivors that survived have to reach out to people our age, to our younger generation, so that it will stop. You know, you have to be there. You have to take your family in, and because a long time ago, what was it, the 60 Scoops, I think it was called?
Mm-hmm.
When a lot of the people who came out of residential, you know, they lost their children to foster homes. And then it went on from there, and now we're losing our kids to foster homes, and it's this big cycle. And I think the resolution to that would have to be, we have to have that family healing. We have to bring back the families and be there for one another. And even though if you're not family, just accept, you know, and talk to the youth that are having kids and can't take care of them. You know, because I think as you get older, you start to you come to an understanding, and you get to an age where you mature like I am now, and I finally understand where it all comes from. And you know, I'm going to try my hardest so that my kids don't have to go through that. They've already been affected, you know. And we just really need to stick together and be together. And have that hope. Like my cookums, I just met them, you know? And it's really touching to hear their stories and listen to where they come from, because that's part of my healing too, you know? And so yeah, I'm sad. I'm sad when I think about all our cookums and our mushrooms and the things that they've come to. And I think in group homes and in foster homes that they should try to talk to the children and try to make them aware of what's going on and why it's happening. Because I know when I was in foster homes, I was told, oh, my mom was nothing but a hooker and a drunk, you know? So what did that do to me? It made me look at my mom like she was a bad person, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm really happy to see everyone come up tonight. Thanks for listening.
And I hope you all find a way to carry it on together. You know, keep meeting, keep supporting each other. I'm sure you are, but there was... Yeah.
My name is Mona Hill, and I'm a social worker. And I'm so grateful that you've raised the issue of foster care. I've worked in foster care. I no longer work for the government. And I wanted to confirm what was raised about foster care. I'm of the opinion that foster care is the modern-day residential school.
Mm-hmm.
Children are being taken from their families. Children are disregarded. Aboriginal children's feelings are disregarded. Parental feelings are disregarded. That young lady who mentioned that she was in 17 different foster homes, when I worked in foster care, I can tell you that there's no reason to disbelieve her story in any way, shape, or form. And those moves are done generally very arbitrarily. As a social worker in foster care, you have no say over when the children are moved, generally where they're moved to. It's a decision that's made that's out of your hands. It's a decision that's made by management. For whatever reasons there are, oftentimes the social workers have no idea. The children then end up being abused oftentimes in foster homes because there aren't enough foster homes. So they'll accept people without doing, well, they say they do background checks. In the work that I've done in the last few years since I left foster care, I've worked with people, with mostly men who have lived on the streets, who have been mired in their addictions, who have told me countless stories over and over again about growing up in foster care and what it's done to them, about the abuse they suffered, and about running away and where to go next, but jail. This is really hard for me. It's the provincial government that we need to look at regarding this foster care system. The children that I've worked with in the past, the adults that I know, and the despair, I feel such despair at times because I feel I don't know how to help. How do I help? Other than to just be there to listen and to honor their humanity. If you want to take action, you need to go to your government. You need to go to the Minister of Social Services, and you need to have foster homes investigators. You need to have the whole system revamped. This moving children from home to home to home to home is the same thing. It's stealing them. They're being stolen.
Could I just add, I think, an important point, and that is Native people who live on reserve in Canada are not citizens. They're wards of the state under the Indian Act. And that's why the government feels they can do this, because of that piece of legislation, which should have been outlawed. It is outlawed. The United Nations outlawed apartheid legislation in the late 40s, but it's still in effect in Canada. Point 5 in the UN Convention on Genocide says when you take children from one group and move them to another, that's genocide. That's happening in the foster care system. There's an attempt now in the European Parliament to bring Canada before the International Court of Justice for committing genocide on its Native people through the foster care system. So it's a political question too, and because of that Indian Act that's in place. And there has to be political pressure brought to bear on Canada from outside as well as from inside the country, and that's what we're trying to do. So yeah, I thought I should mention that. Thanks.
My name is Ken Ward. I come from the Enoch Cree Nation in Alberta. And yeah, I am a Cree. It's ironic you said we're living on the reserve, that we're wards of the government still. Here I am at Treaty, my last name is Ward. Go figure. So I'm branded. I really empathize and I really pray for those who shared their hearts here and many others. Having to go through the rescue myself, you would think I'd be treated different because of my color of my skin. But keep in mind that when we adopt behaviors and attitudes from whence way back when, I had to struggle between two worlds of discrimination and stigma as a little white Indian. And I still endure that to trying to survive, to fit in. So every one of us has our trials, everyone has our tribulations, and we should not ignore, but respect and acknowledge, and to listen. And thank you for listening. And you said it. That was so important. Years ago, when politicians gathered down east in Ottawa, and the politicians were upset and lost and saying, where did we go wrong? And the elders said, you never took the time to understand. And it had to take something like this from our experiences, our stories. But we are resilient. We are hopeful people. Otherwise we would have died. And I'm grateful for the elders and the pipe and the ceremonies that were gathered today, and the people who joined in the little one who walked around to eat. Reminds me that we are still survivors. And there's one thing that will never take our heart away. And we talk about what do we do? Forgiveness is a very powerful medicine. Acknowledging and bringing, and I heard someone bringing the families back together is true. To acknowledge that some of us have suffered post-traumatic stress. that's been identified. And we have been traumatized, and I have been abused in my family. As a result, when I felt I was told in December of 1989 I was going to die from AIDS because I was a drug addict. And where did my addiction stem from? Being raped at the age of 13, but the abuse was further from the res school. So I realized having to be diagnosed as being HIV positive was that's where all the damaged goods feelings that embraced me in my poor self-esteem, but it was deeper than that. Where did it all begin? Alcoholism was introduced even before the res school. The domestic violence happened before the res school. But unfortunately, as one lady said on there, terrorism that was identified, I believe we were part of that human trafficking back then, of our kids being stripped away and taken away by Indian agents. So we talk about the injustices, but we got to acknowledge that it has happened. Now, I'm one of the remaining few of the people who still lives with this disease that people may hate me about. But I learned to thank it because it embraced me to the ceremonies. It embraced me to the people of Saskatchewan, which is my second home. So there is hope for us. We will feel, we will hurt, but we need to be resilient and acknowledge it to be able to ensure that we got to stop the cycle. Who is going to do it? The great big truth and reconciliation forums that may be happening once in a while that needs to be documented is nice, but if somebody comes home from this reserve and shares from their heart, will the people back home be there to embrace them? Truth and reconciliation begins at home first, before we can even talk about it on a national scale to be documented. So they can come home and feel that support. So this is why back home at Enoch, I says, you know, we're doing this backwards again. Why advertise and promote it? Let's talk about it home. And I support in our schools. How many of our reserves have this in their curriculum? It's a shame if all the reserves in Canada doesn't have it in their programs. So we are just as responsible. It's not just the other people. The blaming has to stop. Forgiving has to begin if we're going to heal. So just to do a little plug, that Regina has the largest base, population base of our peoples who are going through the claims of CB and IAP in Saskatchewan, if not in Canada. But thanks to Mr. Peter McCallum, we are now implementing the residential school health support workers here in Regina. So we have that program in existence here finally in Regina. And there's 4 of us. And I wanted to acknowledge one of our elders, Gordon Q. Wayton. My fellow co-worker, please stand up, is Selina Britton. Selina. And to acknowledge and pray for our other elder, Viola Gordon, right now, who is working on some personal family matters at this time. We pray for her and her son. But we are here. We are part of the process. We are here to provide emotional support in your hearings when you go for IAP. We're here to help out in any way we can, but we encourage that we can't do it with just us 4. This opens the door, what you've done, Kevin, with your presentation. It's part of the healing process, and it's not bringing out the pain, but it's part of bringing the love that we need to gain again. So I personally want to thank you, and I send you my prayers in the next sweat lodge I do go. And for all those, and Serena, I felt your tears and I felt your heart. And thank you for taking that time to understand us. And for those who are here, I say hi, and merci. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michelle Higley-Brass, and I lived and grown up in Saskatchewan, Saskatoon. I'm from the Yellowclaw First Nation. I didn't go to residential school. My mom did. She went to the one near Lestock, which is all I really know. And I know bits and stories of when she was taken off the road when she was out with her grandma. She was 6 years old and taken in a car and whisked away, her and her cousin and her grandma. The last thing she remembers seeing is her grandma running down the dirt road after the car. And then the grandma passed away, or her grandma passed away, and that's the woman who raised her. And that's one story I know. I know maybe one or two other stories, but I didn't hear any of those stories until just a few years ago when these stories started coming out, when a lot of the residential school survivors had the courage and to share their stories. And she heard these stories, and she would talk to my sister and I about them. And it gave us a lot of understanding about our mother, who she is and why she is the way she is. And we're talking about young people here. I want to thank all of the survivors who have ever shared their story, because it can't be easy. I can't know what it's like, but it can't be easy. And so I thank everybody who does that. And when we talk about the young people and the intergenerational effects, I think it's so important that young people do hear these stories, because a lot of us growing up not knowing why our parents are like this. And we talk about this crisis that's happening right now amongst our young people. And I think so many of the ones you hear, and this young woman here at 25 said she finally at one point realized and could put some context to it. And I think it really helps a lot of young people to be able to put some context and understand that they weren't just unloved, or that they were just no good, that there's a reason for all of this, and we can start to put the pieces together. So I just want to thank everyone for that, and say I think it's important that we share these stories and can continue to have events like this. Thank you for coming here and doing this. So I wanted to raise that. The other point I did want to make is I worked in the media for 10 years, and I chose a career in the media so that I could tell stories and that I could tell them from a different perspective, because mainstream media in particular does a very poor job of representing the stories accurately, or of doing them at all. And it has to do for many reasons. A lot of people that are in the media are part of the denial. They don't want to acknowledge it. They don't know where to go. There's a lot of mistrust for very good reasons. And but it's starting to, I don't want to say it's starting to change, but there are more First Nations people, people of Aboriginal backgrounds, Métis and other backgrounds going in and trying to tell various stories. And this is one major story. But there's so few of us trying to tell the stories, and the battle that we have. You know, we talk about teaching it in school, we talk about the media. I don't know how much mainstream media coverage you've had, or the kinds of interviews, but when you talked about the man from 60 Minutes saying that the ratings go down when there's stories about Indians, you know, like the thing we hear in the media when we're pitching a story is they'll say, well, we've told that story already. I mean, we know about the residential, but we covered the apology. So what's new?
Mm-hmm.
You know, is it just another survivor telling another story? You know, so it's always hard to pitch that. So how do you cover this? How do you keep bringing it so that the public, the mainstream Canadians on a wide scale will hear these stories? And it's really hard, because we talked about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and they came to our minister and said, how can we work with you? And you know, there's a lot of reluctance on the part of the media. I think there's a lot of individuals that want to tell the story, but it's the corporations. How do you get these stories told properly, or how do you really cover them? And one story in particular, at the CBC, there was a debate about the use of the word survivor when it came to residential school survivors. And the corporate, the top, you know, they dictate what you can say and not say, what terminology you use has to be the same right across the board. And they said, former students, that's the term. We're calling them former students because that's what they are. And a colleague of mine, walking from Winnipeg, was covering what, you know, a bunch of survivors telling their stories. And he had to build trust and inroads here because there was mistrust. And he said, no, I'm not going to tell these stories of these people and call them former students. These are survivors. They're sharing their stories, and you'll have no idea what they've been through. And it was this big fight, and a handful of First Nations journalists at the CBC banded together and all threatened to quit and said, you have to call them survivors. And the CBC finally reneged, and they said, okay, from now on in all of our coverage, we're calling you survivors. So that was a great victory for those people fighting, you know, just because the use of one word will really change how people perceive something. So that was great, but it's still such a struggle because, like I said, it's this idea of, well, what new story can we tell? So I think it's important to talk about this. I think it's important to go online and to share stories in any media that you can, whether it's through a forum like this, whether it's posting a story online, writing poetry, writing books, getting together and sharing, and all the patience of everybody, listening to everybody's individual stories, because we all have something different to say, and everybody here is being really patient and listening. And I think slowly we'll start to, I hope, build this discussion so that it has to be covered and it has to be discussed, because there is this attitude that has just been covered. So I have a tendency to talk quite a bit, so I don't want to take up too much time, because I know a lot of people want to share, and we've heard a lot of stories. But those are the 2 points. I want to thank the survivors for sharing. A lot of young people need to hear it, as well as the rest of Canada. And I think that these kinds of forums are important, because we need to find a way to get mainstream media to cover it, but also find a way to get these issues discussed on a main level. And that's about it. And it's just working together. You go to the CBC website and you look at their online stories and you look at the comments, and they're not moderated. And the racism, the rampant racism. And I go to work and I see this on a website that I'm affiliated with, and it sickens me, and I can't do anything about it. I complain, but it's a corporate policy that we allow these comments, and you can report them. So report them, have them removed, and be active. But I think it's a slow uphill battle. And I've talked to the young people in school, and the teachers are eager to hear this for their kids in their classrooms. So I just hope that we can continue to work together. I'm glad to see people from different backgrounds here to share and talk. So thank you to everyone for your patience and listening to what I have to say, and thank you for sharing.
Before people leave, I should mention I'm going to put a list down here, and if you want to stay in touch or order the book or film, just put your name here and tick it in. We'll do that. Just a little anecdote. I went in 1998 when we first began to hear the stories of women getting sterilized in the Nanaimo Indian Hospital. We had 8 survivors, all the women who'd been sterilized because they weren't going to church. This is the 1950s. Any woman who wasn't going to church was given, they were put on a list, and then their names were given and they were sterilized, because the policy was to basically wipe out traditional people. I mean, that's a long genocidal kind of tradition. I took those people and I said, okay, I called up the Globe and Mail, and I won't say the name of the reporter, but he's a fairly senior one in Vancouver. And I said, I've got these eyewitnesses. They're all sterilized. We have the medical proof from the doctors. They have the stories of how they were picked out. He said, oh, well, can they come over to Vancouver? And I said, no, they're all pretty poor. Can you come to Nanaimo? He said, well, I'll get back to you. And he didn't call back for like 3 weeks. I finally called him, and I pressed him, and he finally said, look, we don't want to get sued by the United Church. I said, well, why would they sue you when it's proof? I mean, they're not being libeled if it's true. Wouldn't touch it. I've had so many experiences like that. It's just, after a while, you just give up on the major media. You become your own media. That's what I had to do, but maybe there's a new generation coming along, who knows?
It's hard when you're alone, too, when you're like a lone voice. It's kind of hard when you're a lone voice in the newsroom, and
Yeah.
there's a handful of people, so
Yeah. Right behind you there. Yep.
In short, my name is Joey Reynolds. I'm from the Paw, Manitoba. I'm from a reserve called Pugwagan, Matthias Cologne. That's probably about 600 miles north of the Paw, Manitoba. So it's pretty far up there. My mom went to residential school, and my mom passed on about 3 years ago. My mom started drinking Listerine a lot. My late mother, Alice, she really got it. Sometimes I wonder why. I wonder why sometimes, like I would travel from Winnipeg, I would travel from Regina to go see my mom in Winnipeg, and she, when I go see her, she used to be really very intoxicated, and her Listerine drinking, she used to call it the golden stuff, gold stuff. And it got worse. It got worse over time. 1 bottle, and went to 2 bottles and 3 bottles. And my mom was in the health sciences center 2-3 times from drinking Listerine, and she was in there 3 times, and the 3rd time she didn't come out. And sometimes I used to wonder why. Why, why would my mom, like she said, she would love me, and then she would tell me to get the hell out of the house, get the hell out of the apartment. Where am I going to sleep? I just came in from Regina. Where am I going to sleep? So you go sleep on the street. I don't give a shit what you. She said, just go sleep in the park. Just get out of my house right now. And she used to just cry and break things and talking about this priest that touched her back in the day. And like, I know, I got my own story, and my own sorrows, I wonder about things. I don't know, and sometimes I used to wonder, like, my mom would kick me out of her apartment, get the hell out, and like 3 o'clock in the morning, and where I go sleep, and I have to go to the Salvation Army. I got no money in my pocket, and I'm living in the north end of the dangerous area in the hood. And I'm walking across the north end bridge, Brick Truck Bridge, 3 o'clock in the morning, and here I am like, geez, what am I going to do? I'm going to get jumped by gang members. I don't know what I'm going to do. I just want to go back to Regina, at least have an apartment there. And I got to go to the Salvation Army, and I'm like, geez, like 3 o'clock in the morning. But these are the consequences. I realize these things, and it's kind of like acceptance, like what my mother went through, and I'm trying to accept it, but sometimes I'm not wondering like why, you know? And these effects that my mother went through, and God bless her soul. I love her, she's a wonderful lady, but she had her problems. And sometimes I'm just left still hating what she went through and what the people did to her. And now I'm getting the effect of things. I have like hate and spite and just, I don't know. And sometimes I'm getting counseling myself right now, but sometimes it's just, every time I go back to Winnipeg, I go past my mom's place, it's just a living hell. You know, just to have that memory, it's just like a ghost that won't go away. But I know there's hope and there's a lot of good things out there too, and optimism. And being in Regina, it's a wonderful city, and I'm really happy that the students and people have come out to look at this and participate in this study. And I read some of your stuff on Google, and it's wonderful, wonderful stuff. So I just wanted to say that. And thank you very much for letting me talk.
Well, I hope you won't find this a little too much off the subject, but the thing that keeps occurring to me is it wasn't the indigenous people that messed up the environment that's caused global warming. So, you know, we think about what can these indigenous people do to get their lives together. So maybe the white culture needs to look at the way the indigenous cultures work. You know, before they were destroyed by imperialist culture, as my friend David here brought up from Bolivia. So, you know, it's a bigger picture, the problem.
Yep.
You know, this consumer society with no thought for the consequences. I'm just throwing that out.
No, I keep wondering when when we're gonna have our own healing process. You know, I was gonna write a play called the Caucasian Healing Fund. What do you think?
My name is Philip Brass, and I'm from the BC's First Nation. I didn't go to residential school, nor did my father, but all of his brothers and sisters did. My grandparents did. You know, actually, one year was bringing up about, you know, we are, no matter, not just First Nations people, but all of us as North Americans, you know, we are all victims of a lost potential of what could have been. You know, the imperialists who didn't want to learn, who didn't want to see, who wanted to impose their will. You know, we've all been ripped off by that. And you know, I believe the road to healing is always the key, is our children. Just the same way that they destroyed us, or attempted to destroy us, was through our children, take them from us and to infuse them with negative things such as fear, hate, you know, self-doubt, violence, and you know, it's been a long road. You know, it's been hundreds of years now, and we've arrived at this place. You know, we are seeing, you know, we're living in a time of such massive change. You know, in the last 50 years, this world has really turned into something that is quite monstrous. And you know, it's daunting, you know, to think of, you know, where do we go, how long is it going to take, and it is going to take a long time. It's going to take generations. It's going to take centuries. And you know, we don't know if we can recover or what is our goal, but I believe that healing process does start at home. It starts with our home fires. You know, we have to infuse our children with positive love, kindness, forgiveness. And forgiveness is a key one. That's a powerful thing that will set you free. And you know, it's difficult. I mean, you know, I know there's resistance, of course, for curriculum and that sort of thing in the mainstream populace, but, you know, I believe the key we really get, at least on our reserves, you know, any schools that we can, you know, we need to be starting to develop that curriculum. Children have to be taught this from a very young age, whether they're, you know, no matter what race you are, you know, and it's really important too for the children to learn, for the white kids and everybody. I mean, Canada isn't just white people anymore. I mean, we have such massive immigrant populations. I mean, these people are coming over here, they have no clue of any of this statistic. And, you know, I mean, that opens up all sorts of, I mean, it's a standard barrier to overrun. So that really needs to be in the education system from the kindergarten on, you know, in order for any change. And it's going to take a long time, but we have to do the hard work in order to make that happen, or else it's just going to continue. Thank you.